In the land of freedom and dreams, the United States of America, there are stories that defy logic, stories that tear through the fabric of what we assume to be the safety of childhood. My name is Margaret Ellison, and I am a grandmother now. People see me as the sweet old woman who bakes cookies, offers gentle advice, and rocks babies to sleep. But there's a story behind these eyes, one that I kept buried for decades, even from my own children. It's a story soaked in pain, silence, and survival. A story that began in a quiet town in Ohio, where the house on Elmwood Street held a secret darker than the night itself. This is not just my story. It's a cry for every child who has suffered in silence. It's for the broken-hearted, the forgotten, and those still trapped in places of invisible torment. I survived something no child should endure. And now for the first time I am ready to speak. Before I continue this story, make sure you subscribe to this Grandma Stories channel, and let me know where you're watching from the comments section. Grandma Story is ready to do the giveaway of $50 for reaching 1,000 subscribers. The house looked normal from the outside: 2 stories, whitewood panels, a red door, and a swing that creaked in the wind. But inside that house, my life began to unravel the moment my mother died and my father remarried. Her name was Denise. She wasn't the evil stepmother from a fairy tale. She was worse. I was just 8 years old when she arrived. My mother had passed away from pneumonia the year before, and my father, lonely, grieving, fell into the arms of the woman who would soon turn my world into a nightmare. Denise moved in with only a few boxes and one rule: I was to stay out of her way. She never smiled at me, never said hello. She acted like I was a shadow in my own home. The photos of my mother disappeared, my toys vanished, and the warmth that once made our house feel like a home turned cold almost overnight. By fall, I was doing all the chores, scrubbing floors, washing dishes, folding laundry, while Denise lounged on the porch with a wine glass in hand, barking orders like I was the maid. She never hit me, not then. But her weapon was silence and humiliation. She laughed about me with her friends, called me the help, made me stand and curtsy like some unpaid servant. School became my escape, but even that didn't last. She told my teachers I had behavioral issues, and they started treating me differently. One day I brought home a B on my math test. She ripped it up and hissed, "You're not smart enough to matter." Eventually, she took away my clothes and replaced them with rags. I began to disappear, to shrink inside myself. At night, I'd curl under a worn blanket in a freezing room, clutching my mother's old scarf and whispering to the ceiling, hoping she could hear me from heaven. Then came the locks, first on the bathroom, then the kitchen. The house slowly became a prison. Denise was building a world where I would vanish. And deep down I knew something darker was coming. The basement, always cold, always forbidden, wasn't just a place I was told to avoid. It was being prepared for me. My father wasn't a cruel man. Not at first. But grief turned him into a ghost. After my mother died, something inside him broke. He stopped noticing things, like the bruises under my eyes or the way Denise screamed at me when he wasn't looking. He spent more time asleep than awake. Denise said he was just tired. But I later learned she was slipping something into his tea pills that dulled him, numbed him, kept him silent. He let her take control of everything: the bills, the meals, the rules. And eventually me. I tried to reach him. "Daddy, I'm cold at night." "Daddy," Denise threw away my things. "Daddy, she doesn't let me eat." He would blink slowly and murmur, "She's doing her best, Maggie." But she wasn't. She was breaking me. Denise took advantage of his silence. She mocked him behind his back. And when he was too weak to protest, she isolated me entirely. I wasn't allowed to eat at the table anymore. I wasn't allowed to watch TV. She said I had demon energy and needed to be cleansed by humility. And when I once spoke up too loud, just a plea for help, she slapped me across the face and said, "Try that again and see what happens." I never tried again. He saw at once, my bruised wrist, the dark circles under my eyes, and said nothing. I stopped calling him Daddy. He had stopped being one. One night I watched Denise crush pills into his soup and smile. She was erasing both of us. And no one was coming to stop her. It happened on a Thursday. Cold wind rattled the windows and snow threatened to fall. I had left the back door slightly open while bringing in firewood, just for a second. Denise caught it. She screamed louder than ever before, called me useless, filthy. Worse than trash. I said I was sorry, I begged. But her eyes were wild. She dragged me by the arm across the kitchen through the hall toward the basement door. No. I cried. Please. I'll fix it. I'll do anything. She didn't speak. She unlocked the door, yanked it open and shoved me down the first 2 steps. I landed hard, my elbow hitting the wood. I turned to crawl back up, but she was already slamming the door shut. Click. Locked. The darkness was suffocating. The air smelled like mold and old oil. The walls were damp. A single chain hung from a pipe near the corner. And before I could fully understand what was happening, she was back, opening the door just long enough to toss down a pair of handcuffs and a rusted chain. You want to be invisible? She spat. Then disappear. She didn't return for the rest of the day. I screamed. I pounded the door. I cried so hard I made myself sick. But no one came. I was there in that freezing pit, with nothing but a bucket in the corner and an old sheet on the floor. No food. No water. Just 10 days of silence. And the belief that maybe I had died and no one had told me. The moment the door slammed shut behind me, I was swallowed by total darkness. The basement smelled worse than I remembered, like mildew, rust, and old rot. The air was thick and wet, clinging to my skin like a second layer of punishment. I tried to turn around, but Denise had already locked the door. I heard the click of the bolt and her voice, muffled but vicious. Maybe sometime down there will teach you manners. I screamed. I begged. I pounded my fists on the wooden door until they bruised. No one answered. The house was too far from the neighbors, and even if they heard, they wouldn't come. They never had before. My eyes adjusted slowly, revealing just enough to terrify me. The chair I'd seen before wasn't empty. Now a pair of cuffs and chains hung from the ceiling beam beside it. There was an old mattress in the corner, yellowed with age and moisture. A bucket. A broken lamp. That was all. I didn't sit. I couldn't. I curled against the farthest wall and tried to disappear into the cold stone. The first few hours were the worst. I thought she'd come back quickly, yell some more, maybe drag me upstairs. But night came, and with it silence. I was alone. By the second day, hunger gnawed at me. My stomach felt like it was trying to eat itself. My throat was dry from crying, my lips cracking. I called for her. Whispered at first. Then louder. Please, please, I'm sorry. She didn't answer. I scratched tally marks into the wooden beam, trying to count the hours, then the days. My fingers blistered. My nails broke. The only sound was the creaking of the house above and the dripping from the pipes. By the 4th day I began hallucinating. I saw my mother glowing in the darkness telling me to hold on. I smelled her perfume, heard her voice. I tried to talk to her, but she always faded. Denise came once on the 5th day. She opened the door and tossed down a single slice of dry bread and a small bottle of water. You want more? Behave better. Then she left. I devoured it in seconds and cried harder, ashamed of how grateful I was for the crumbs. My skin itched from the dust and mold. I had to use the bucket. I had no choice. My legs shook whenever I stood. And still the door stayed closed. 10 days passed. 10 days of darkness. 10 days of no warmth, no comfort, no human touch. Just fear. And pain. And silence. When she finally opened the door again, I couldn't stand on my own. She dragged me up the steps by my arm like a rag doll. You remember now, don't you? She whispered as she pushed me into the hallway. I nodded. I had no strength to do anything else. But deep inside, a fire had started. Small. Weak. But it was there. And one day, I would make her regret it. I wasn't the same after the basement. When Denise dragged me back upstairs, I left more than just blood and sweat behind. I left a part of myself. The part that still believed in safety, in love and rescue. That part stayed locked in the cold, chained air of that basement. And what emerged was a girl too quiet, too broken, and far too old for her age. I remember looking at the mirror in the hallway, and not recognizing the girl staring back. Her face was pale and hollow. Her eyes were dull, rimmed in purple. Her lips were cracked, and her hair, once long and brushed by my mother every night, was matted and dirty. I stared for a long time until Denise shoved me forward. You stink, she said coldly. Wash up and don't speak to me unless spoken to. The hot water in the shower stung my skin. I stood under it too long waiting to feel something. Anything. But numbness had settled into my bones like it had found a home. I scrubbed until my skin turned red. I wanted to peel away the filth, the fear, the memories. But they clung tighter than dirt. At school the teachers noticed. They whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. She's lost weight. She barely talks. Should we call someone? But no one ever did. Denise had gotten ahead of them with stories about how I was going through a phase, how I had a vivid imagination, how I was prone to exaggeration. And I played my part. I smiled when they asked. I said I tripped when they saw bruises. I said I wasn't hungry when my stomach growled during class. I had learned one rule from those 10 days. Don't give Denise a reason. Keep your head down. Be invisible. But even though I walked like a shadow, she found reasons anyway. A sock left on the floor. A dish not scrubbed to her liking. A cough during her phone call. Anything could spark her rage, and every time she yelled, my body stiffened in anticipation, wondering if I would be sent back into that darkness again. My father. He saw less and less. Or maybe he chose to. He spent most of his time in bed, half asleep, half alive. Denise kept feeding him pills and lies. She's doing fine, I'd hear her say through the walls. She just needs firm discipline. And he would nod or maybe just drift back to sleep. One night, I crept into his room. I stood there for a long time watching him breathe, hoping he'd wake up and see me. Hoping the real daddy, the one who used to carry me on his shoulders and sing while he cooked, would come back. He didn't wake up. So I tiptoed out. Quiet. Invisible. Alone. By winter, I had become a ghost inside that house. I floated from room to room, never making a sound, never leaving a trace. Denise liked it that way. She told me often, "You're only useful when you're silent." And so I obeyed. But the silence started to crack when I saw her. It was a snowy Tuesday afternoon. I had finished my chores early and slipped into the front room, where Denise rarely went. The old couch still smelled like my mother's perfume. A faded memory that comforted me more than any blanket. I sat near the window, careful not to smudge the glass, and looked outside. Across the street lived a girl about my age. I didn't know her name, but I knew her laugh. I'd heard it float through the air like music when she played in the snow. She wore bright coats, always red or purple, and had curly brown hair like mine used to be. That day, she was building a snowman with her brother and father. They laughed when the hat kept falling off. Her mother came out with hot cocoa. They drank together on the porch, wrapped in a single big blanket. I watched them, not with jealousy but with a quiet ache. That was what normal looked like. That was what love felt like. And then it happened. She saw me. The girl across the street looked up and spotted me in the window. For a second I froze, afraid she would look away, or worse, ignore me. But she didn't. She smiled. A simple, warm smile. I didn't know what to do. No one had smiled at me in so long I had forgotten what it meant. I lifted my hand and gave the tiniest wave. She waved back. That was it. Just a wave. But it did something to me. It cracked the ice I'd built around my heart. Someone had seen me. I wasn't invisible. The next day I returned to the window. And again she was there. This time she made a silly face. I couldn't help it, I smiled. A real smile. The first in months. We never spoke. We never crossed the street. But every day after school we met at that window. Her face gave me strength. Her joy reminded me what it was like to be a child. Denise never noticed. But in that small act of kindness, a look, a grin, a silly face, I began to feel human again. Living under Denise's roof meant following rules. Rules designed not to guide but to control. They weren't written down. They didn't have logic. They shifted with her moods, unpredictable and cruel. Break one and punishment followed, immediate and merciless. Rule number 1. Speak only when spoken to. Rule number 2. No food without permission. Rule number 3. The basement is always locked, unless she says otherwise. Rule number 4. Never question her. Rule number 5. Don't talk about your mother. The last one hurt the most. I had once tried to keep a picture of my mom beneath my pillow. It was a school photo, her in a navy blouse smiling softly. I whispered to it every night like a prayer. When Denise found it, she tore it in two and burned it in the sink. She's gone. Get over it, she spat. After that, I stopped saying her name. But I never forgot it. The kitchen had become a battleground. I wasn't allowed to eat unless I completed every chore. If I left a smudge on the countertop, dinner was withheld. If a fork was out of place, I went to bed hungry. I got used to chewing ice cubes just to quiet the hunger in my belly. One afternoon, I found a piece of toast someone had left on the edge of the trash can. I stared at it for a long time before quickly grabbing it, wiping the crust off with my sleeve, and stuffing it into my mouth. That was the day I learned about rule number 6. Never take what's not given. She beat me, not with fists but with words. She grabbed my shoulders and screamed so close to my face, I could smell the wine on her breath. You filthy little thief. I take you in, and this is how you thank me. I wanted to say she hadn't taken me in. She'd taken me hostage. But I stayed quiet. I had learned to cry without making a sound. Even the air in that house felt weaponized. I could never relax, never breathe deeply. I tiptoed through my days, terrified of triggering her. I learned how to listen to footsteps, how to recognize her moods by the way she shut doors. I became a master at reading danger without looking up. Denise didn't need to hit me often. Her rules did the job for her. Every corner of that house reminded me of what I wasn't allowed to do. My bedroom was a punishment, the kitchen a test, the living room her throne, and the basement? That was the ultimate threat. Sometimes she would walk past me and casually say, "Don't make me open that door again." I would nod. I always nodded. But inside I started keeping my own list of rules. Rule 1, survive. Rule 2, keep your spirit hidden. Rule 3, remember who you are because she wants you to forget. Rule 4, don't give up. Rule 5, one day you will leave. Winter came early that year with a vengeance. Snow piled outside the windows, thick and unrelenting, like a blanket from the sky that never brought warmth, only silence. Cold crept into the house on Elmwood Street, settling in like a ghost in every corner. But the cold inside our home had nothing to do with weather. It lived in Denise's heart. The furnace worked, but Denise said fuel was too expensive to waste on brats. So I wore 2 sweaters and wool socks with holes while Denise wrapped herself in fur-lined robes and drank her coffee with cream. My fingers cracked from washing dishes in freezing water. My lips split and bled. Sometimes the only warm place in the house was the tiny space behind the furnace pipes in the basement, the very place I had once been chained. I would sneak down there when Denise went out, wrap myself in a blanket and sit in the dark. Strange, I know. But the darkness there didn't scare me anymore. It was honest, predictable, unlike her. That winter the whispers began. Not ghostly whispers, real ones. At night, lying in bed, I began to hear voices coming from the hallway. Denise talking on the phone in hushed tones, pacing back and forth. "I can't keep her much longer," she said once. Another night. No one would miss her. Each time I heard something, I lay stiff beneath my thin blanket, eyes wide, heart racing. Who was she talking to? What did she mean? Can't keep her. Was she planning to send me away? Or worse? I wanted to run. But where? I had no one left. My relatives were strangers. My teachers looked through me. And my father, if he was still alive in that bed, was unreachable. I began to pack a small bag in secret. Just in case. A pair of socks. My mother's old scarf, the only thing I had left of her. A pencil. A notebook. I wrote letters in that notebook, letters to no one. Letters to myself. To my mother. To whatever angels might have been listening. "I'm still here," I wrote. "She hasn't broken me yet." One night the whispers stopped. Denise didn't come home. I waited. I stared out the window for hours watching snow fall in fat flakes. The house was so quiet, it felt like the world had paused. She didn't return the next morning either. Part of me was terrified. The other part felt something unfamiliar, hope. But when the door creaked open that afternoon, she walked in with grocery bags and a wide, eerie smile. "Did you miss me?" she asked. I didn't answer. She stepped close, leaned down and whispered, "You thought I left you? Oh no, sweetheart. I always come back." Then she laughed. It echoed through the house. cold and sharp like the wind outside. But that night I made a decision. I wouldn't just survive. I would escape. From the moment Denise whispered those words, I always come back. I knew she would never let me go willingly. If I was going to leave that house, it would have to be in secret. Quiet as the wind. Silent as the pain I had carried for years. I started making plans. They were fragile at first, like spider webs strung together with hope. I didn't know where I would go or how I'd get there. But I knew one thing. I had to get out before she changed her mind again. Before she opened that basement door and tossed me back into the dark. I watched her routines. She always took long showers on Sundays after church, about 20 minutes. She went shopping on Wednesdays and usually stayed out for at least an hour. And every evening, she fell asleep in the recliner after her second glass of wine, always with the news blaring too loud for her to hear footsteps. I found a paper bag and slowly started hiding things inside it. The scarf, the pencil, the notebook. I folded a sweater into the bottom. I tucked a slice of bread under a napkin and placed it between the pages of a book. I even found 2 crumpled dollars in my father's old coat. It felt like gold. The plan was simple but risky. On a Wednesday afternoon while Denise was out shopping, I would slip out through the back door. I would walk fast, never run, and head toward the woods behind the neighborhood. I'd follow the tree line until I reached the highway. Then, maybe someone would help me. Maybe not. But it was still better than staying. Every night that week I dreamed of freedom. I dreamed of riding buses to faraway places, of strangers who gave me warm food and asked nothing in return. I dreamed of my mother. She always appeared at the end of the road, arms open, calling me home. But dreams fade quickly when you live in a house of shadows. 2 nights before I was going to leave, something changed. I was lying in bed, pretending to sleep, when I heard the soft creak of the hallway floorboards. Denise was walking slowly, deliberately, not pacing this time, hunting. I held my breath. The doorknob to my room turned. She stepped inside. "Maggie," she whispered too sweetly. "Are you awake?" I stayed still. She came closer. I felt her hand brush my blanket. "Good girl," she said. "I think we'll have a special day soon. Just you and me. Maybe another visit to the basement." My stomach turned. She left the room but sleep never came. I knew then I couldn't wait until Wednesday. I had to go now. I didn't wait for morning. The moment Denise shut her door that night, I was already tying my worn sneakers. My heart pounded so loud I was sure it would wake her. My hand shook as I reached for the paper bag I'd hidden behind the loose panel in the closet. I took one last look around the room. Not because I'd miss it, but because I needed to remember it. Remember what I was leaving behind. I wrapped my mother's scarf around my neck, tucked the bag under my coat, and crept toward the back door. The hallway was pitch black. Every step creaked louder than I wanted it to. I paused at the corner near Denise's door. The light beneath it was still on. The TV buzzed. Then, thank God, a soft snore. She was asleep. I turned the knob on the back door slowly, praying it wouldn't squeak. It opened. Just a crack. Cold air rushed in like a whisper from the outside world. I slipped out. The snow had stopped, but the wind hadn't. It sliced through my coat and stung my face, but I didn't care. Every step away from that house was a step toward hope. I didn't run. Not yet. Not until I reached the tree line. Only then did I let myself move faster. My feet crunched over ice, branches slapped my face, and my lungs ached with cold air, but I didn't stop. I didn't dare. Behind me the house stood silent like a tomb. I walked for what felt like hours. My toes went numb. My breath came in foggy gasps. I had no idea if I was going in the right direction. I just kept moving, whispering, "Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't stop," like it was a spell. Then lights. Not the headlights of a car, but a distant glow flickering behind trees. I followed it. I climbed a small ridge, heart pounding with hope and fear tangled together. At the top I saw it. A gas station. It looked like a palace. I stumbled down the hill and across the icy shoulder of the road, nearly collapsing at the door. A man behind the counter looked up with wide eyes as I pushed it open. I must have looked wild, dirty clothes, tangled hair, cracked lips. He started toward me. "Hey, sweetheart, are you okay?" And for the first time in years I let the truth out. "No." I whispered, and then collapsed into his arms. I woke up in a hospital bed. The lights were too bright, the sheets too white, and the air too clean. For a second I panicked. I thought I was back in Denise's house, that she had found me, dragged me home, and scrubbed me down before the next punishment. Then I saw the nurse. She smiled softly, gently adjusting the four in my arm. Her eyes were warm, not like Denise's. She didn't look through me. She saw me. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. "You're safe now." Safe. The word felt strange. I had never known what it truly meant. A police officer came next. He was kind, but his uniform made me nervous. I sat up in the bed, pulling the blanket tighter around me. My voice barely worked. It cracked when I tried to speak. He asked my name. I whispered it. He asked where I came from. I told him the address on Elmwood Street. Then came the questions I couldn't answer. "Do you know your father's full name? Have you ever attended school regularly? Did she ever take you to the doctor? Do you have any relatives nearby?" Each one felt like a knife slicing into everything I had tried so hard to bury. My eyes filled with tears, but I didn't cry. I had forgotten how to. I just shook my head, over and over, ashamed that I couldn't give them more. But I told them what I could. About the basement. About the bread and the bucket. About the chains. About the cold. They listened. They wrote things down. They didn't call me a liar. Later that day, a social worker named Karen came to sit beside my bed. She was gentle. Her voice never rose above a whisper. She brought me apple slices and a juice box. I stared at the food for a long time before I let myself eat. "No one's going to hurt you anymore," she promised. I wanted to believe her. But when she left the room, I pulled the blanket back over my head, just in case Denise somehow appeared at the foot of my bed. That fear wasn't something that would vanish overnight. I stayed in the hospital for 3 days. Doctors checked my bruises. Nurses brought me meals on trays and smiled when I finished them. I was given clean clothes, a teddy bear, a place to breathe. But even in safety, my body flinched when someone touched my shoulder or spoke too loudly. My wounds were more than skin deep. And healing? That would be the next hardest thing I'd ever have to do. After the hospital, they took me to a foster home. I didn't understand what that meant at first. I thought maybe it was another version of Denise. Another stranger who would smile for the public and turn cruel behind closed doors. So when Karen buckled me into the passenger seat of her sedan and said, "You're going to a safe place now," I nodded, but I didn't trust it. Not yet. The house was on a quiet street, not far from where I'd run, but far enough that Denise wouldn't find me. It was small, blue, and a little crooked on one side, but it smelled like cinnamon and laundry soap. A woman named Joyce opened the door. She had gray hair and laugh lines around her eyes, and when she said, "Hi, sweetheart," it didn't sound fake. Still, I flinched when she reached out to take my bag. Old habits die hard. That night, Joyce showed me to my room. My own room. It had a window that faced the trees, a bookshelf with worn paperbacks, and a bed with a quilt that smelled like sunshine. I stood there frozen. She noticed. "Do you want me to stay for a bit? Or would you like some time to yourself?" I didn't know how to answer. I hadn't been given choices in years. So I just whispered, "I don't know." She smiled. "That's okay, honey. Take your time." Then she left the door open when she walked away. That detail stuck with me. Denise had never left a door open. Not unless it was to threaten me with what was behind it. But this door? It was open like an invitation. Not a trap. I sat on the bed slowly, carefully. The mattress didn't sag. The pillow didn't smell like mildew. The quilt wrapped around me like a hug I hadn't realized I needed. For the first time in my life, I slept without fear of footsteps in the hallway. In the morning there was breakfast. Not cold cereal in a bowl of water. Real breakfast. Eggs. Toast. Varmtea. Joyce asked if I wanted jam or butter, and when I couldn't answer she just said, "We'll try both today." I didn't cry. Not on the outside. But inside something cracked again, this time not from fear but from release. 'Cause maybe, just maybe, I was free. The days passed slowly in Joyce's house. There were no screams echoing from behind closed doors. No punishments for breathing too loudly. No eyes burning holes through me. The quiet here wasn't dangerous. It was gentle. healing. But still I struggled to adjust. Joyce never pushed. She spoke softly, gave me space, and treated me like I mattered. At first, that scared me more than being ignored. Because kindness felt unfamiliar, foreign, suspicious. I waited for the change, for her smile to vanish, her tone to sharpen. But it never did. Instead, she kept inviting me in bit by bit. She left books on my nightstand. Some about brave girls, some about adventures. One day, a blank notebook appeared with a note on the front. For your thoughts, if you ever want to share them. No pressure.
No judgment.
Just you. I stared at that notebook for a whole day before I opened it. And then one night I began to write. Not stories, not make-believe, but the truth. My truth. I wrote about the red door on Elmwood Street, the basement chains, the hunger. I wrote about the girl in the window, and the whispers through the walls, and the rules that turned my childhood into a prison. I wrote until my hands ached and my heart spilled all over the pages. It became my voice, when my real one still shook too much to speak. At school, I was placed in a quiet classroom with a teacher named Mrs. Lenz. She was older, with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. She never asked me to talk in front of the class. Instead, she gave me small assignments, pulled me aside gently, and told me, "There's no rush, Margaret. You don't have to shout to be strong." I liked that. I still barely spoke to the other kids. Their laughter reminded me of what I'd lost. But sometimes during recess I'd sit on the swing and look toward the sky. And for the first time in years, I'd let the sun touch my face without guilt. One afternoon, Mrs. Lenz handed me back a story I'd written for class. She'd underlined one line in red and left a note. "You have a powerful voice. Keep using it." It hit me harder than any of Denise's cruelest words ever had, because someone finally was listening. And I was starting to believe that I had something worth saying. I thought I could leave the past behind me once I escaped the house on Elmwood Street. But freedom, I learned, doesn't come without confronting what tried to destroy you. And for me, that meant standing in a courtroom and facing Denise. The prosecutor had explained everything carefully. "You don't have to speak if you're not ready," he said. "But if you do, your words could make the difference." At first I said no. The thought of seeing her again made my skin crawl. The idea of speaking in front of strangers, telling them about the basement, the chains, the nights without food, made my stomach twist. But as the trial approached, I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who sat in the dark and whispered to the ceiling, the one who thought no one would ever hear her. If I stayed silent, Denise's lies might win, and I refused to let her steal my voice again. So I said yes. On the day of the hearing, I wore a plain dress. Joyce brushed my hair and held my hand all the way to the courthouse. Karen, my social worker, sat beside me in the waiting room, rubbing small circles on my back as I shook. When they called my name, I thought my legs would collapse. But they didn't. I walked into that courtroom with my head low, but my heart steady. And when they asked me to raise my right hand and swear to tell the truth, I looked up, straight ahead, and said, "I do." Denise was there. She wore a gray suit and a fake expression of innocence. When she saw me, something flickered in her eyes. Not fear, not remorse, just annoyance. Like I was still some inconvenience. But this time, I wasn't her prisoner. I was a witness, a survivor. They asked me questions gently. "Can you tell us what happened the night you were locked in the basement?" I took a deep breath. My voice trembled. My hands sweated. But I answered. And as I spoke, something inside me rose. Not fear, not anger, but strength. I told them about the cold, the hunger, the dark, the loneliness. I told them about the rules, the silence, the threats, the bruises. I told them everything. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Not because they didn't believe me, but because they did. I didn't look at Denise again. I didn't need to. She didn't matter anymore. That day, I walked out of the courtroom not as the girl who survived, but as the girl who spoke. And no matter what happened next, I knew one thing for sure. She could never silence me again. The verdict came 2 weeks after I testified. I was sitting in Joyce's living room when the phone rang. She picked it up, spoke quietly, then covered the receiver with her hand and looked at me with a softness I'll never forget. "She's been sentenced, sweetheart," she said. 10 years. 10 years. It wasn't forever. It didn't erase what had happened, but it meant something. It meant the system, flawed as it was, had finally seen me, had finally believed me. It meant Denise was behind bars, and I no longer had to fear footsteps in the dark. When Joyce hung up, I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just sat still and let it sink in. I was free. Not just from the basement, not just from Denise, but from the silence that had wrapped around me like chains. That night I did something small but powerful. I took my notebook and wrote one sentence. She didn't win. And then I closed it, set it on my dresser, and stood at the window, the same way I used to in that house. But now the view was different. I saw kids riding bikes, a woman watering her flowers, a man walking his dog. Normal life. Peaceful life. Joyce made hot cocoa and sat with me on the porch. We didn't talk much. We didn't have to. The breeze carried everything we needed to say. A few days later, I was enrolled in therapy. The first session was hard. I stared at the wall for 20 minutes before I could say my name. But over time, I learned to talk again. Not just with words, but with truth, with pain, with the courage that had carried me through 10 days in a basement and years of invisible bruises. I met other girls like me. I met women who had survived worse. We shared our stories like puzzle pieces. Together, we built something strong from the broken. One day, my therapist asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I didn't know. But then I thought of the girl across the street, the one who smiled at me through the window when I needed it most. I thought of Mrs. Lenz, of Karen, of Joyce, and I said, "I want to help girls like me." She smiled. "You already are." Time passed. Not quickly, not painlessly, but steadily like water smoothing stone. I stayed with Joyce for nearly 2 years. She became more than a foster mother, she became family. She never asked for my trust. She earned it, gently, over shared breakfasts and long drives with the windows down. She gave me what Denise never could. A sense of belonging. Joyce let me paint my room light yellow, my favorite color. She let me choose my own books from the library. She cheered when I brought home a C in math because it had once been an F. She never demanded perfection. She celebrated progress. There were bad days still. Nights where I woke up sweating from dreams of that basement. Days where I couldn't speak without my throat tightening. But Joyce never scolded me. She just held me, wrapped me in silence that wasn't threatening but safe. Eventually, I started calling her Mama Joyce. She cried the first time I said it. I started writing more. Not just about my past but about who I was becoming. I wrote poems, short stories, even little speeches. Writing helped me speak when my voice trembled. One of my poems was published in the school paper. The headline read, "Light finds its way in." I started to believe that. When I turned 13, Mama Joyce threw me a birthday party. It was the first I could remember. There were balloons, chocolate cake, and a gift wrapped in blue paper. Inside was a necklace with a small golden key. "It's not to open anything," she said. "It's to remind you that you were never meant to be locked away." I wore it every day after that. Eventually, I was given the option to stay with Joyce permanently. No court battles. No more bouncing from house to house. No more fear of going back to where I came from. The judge looked at me and asked, "Margaret, is this what you want?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said clearly. "This is home." And for the first time, the word meant something real. By the time I turned 16, I had a voice. Not just the whisper I'd once used in fear, but a real voice, one that carried. One that others listened to. And I had begun to understand something I hadn't before. My story could help someone else survive. It started small. My guidance counselor asked if I'd be willing to speak to a small group of girls at school. Girls who had faced difficult home lives. I said yes, even though my palms sweated and my knees shook the entire week leading up to it. I wrote my speech in that same notebook I'd once filled with letters to the dark. This time the pages held light. I told the group about the house on Elmwood Street, about Denise, about the basement. But more importantly, I told them what came after, about Mama Joyce, about the yellow walls of my new room, about healing. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then a girl in the back stood up and whispered, "That happened to me too." It was the first time I saw how powerful shared pain could be. Not to break, but to connect. Word spread. More schools invited me. Youth centers, churches, women's shelters. I didn't go to every event. Sometimes the wounds felt too fresh, even years later. But each time I did speak, I felt myself grow stronger. Not because I forgot what happened, but because I remembered it with purpose. Mama Joyce was always in the front row, tissues in hand, pride in her eyes. By 17, I began volunteering, first at the shelter where Karen once worked, then at a crisis hotline for abused children. I wasn't a therapist. I didn't have all the answers. But I knew what it felt like to think no one would ever believe you. And so I listened. With my whole heart. Each time I heard a voice crack through the phone or a girl say, "I'm scared," I remembered that girl who once waved from the window. I remembered the weight of silence, and the cost of breaking it. And I knew that every time I told my truth, I wasn't just freeing myself. I was building a bridge for someone else to escape too. Graduation day came with sunlight, wildflowers, and a sky so wide it felt like it was cheering for me. I stood in a cap and gown outside the high school I once walked through with my head down. Now I held it high. My name was called, and I stepped onto the stage with hands that no longer trembled and a heart that beat for the girl I used to be. And the woman I was becoming. Mama Joyce clapped so hard I thought her hands might burst. I was the first person in my family to finish high school. After the ceremony, she gave me another small box. Inside was a locket. One side held a photo of my mother, the only surviving copy we had found after Denise was arrested. The other side held a quote on delicate paper. "You are not what they did to you. You are what you choose to become." That night, while others partied, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and thought about everything that had brought me to this moment. Every locked door. Every whispered insult. Every step I'd taken away from fear and toward freedom. I could have let it end there, just be content with survival. But I knew I wanted more. Not just for myself but for other girls like me. So I applied to community college, majoring in psychology and social work. I wanted to understand what trauma did to the brain, to the heart, to the spirit, and how to help rebuild it. At orientation, I sat next to a girl with bruises half covered by makeup. I recognized the way she didn't make eye contact. I saw the flinch in her shoulders when someone laughed too loudly. I leaned over and said gently, "You're not alone." She looked at me with glassy eyes. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. We shared the language of the silenced, and I had learned how to speak it fluently. As college began, I found a rhythm to my new life. Classes, work, volunteering at a shelter on weekends. I was exhausted most days, but the kind of tired that comes with meaning, with motion, with healing. At night I still kept my old notebook, not because I needed to escape anymore, but because I needed to remember how far I had come. By my early 20s I had found my place. I worked at a center for girls in crisis, runaways, survivors of abuse, foster teens with nowhere to go. Girls who looked too young for the pain they carried. Girls who reminded me of me. I wasn't their savior. I never pretended to be. But I was proof, living, breathing proof that you could crawl out of the darkness and build something new. They called me Miss Max. Some were quiet at first, just like I had been. Others were angry, guarded, fists up before a word was ever spoken. But I never took their silence or rage personally. I knew it was armor. I had worn it too. One girl, Serena, was 12 when she came to us. She hadn't spoken in weeks. She had that same hollow look I remembered from the mirror. Like someone had turned her soul down to a whisper. I sat with her every day. No pressure. Just presence. One afternoon I gave her a notebook, just like Joyce once gave me. "I don't need to read it," I told her. "You don't even have to write in it. Just keep it close." 2 weeks later she handed me a page. It said, "How did you survive?" I took a deep breath and wrote back. I kept the truth inside me, until I was strong enough to speak it. From that moment she began to write. Pages and pages. Some angry. Some heartbreaking. Some hopeful. Eventually she spoke. Then she laughed. Then she healed. It wasn't just Serena. It was Maria, who hid bruises behind big sunglasses. It was Tamika, who had been in 5 foster homes by 13. It was Lacey, who had tried to run away so many times she forgot what she was running to. Each girl brought a piece of my past with her. But more importantly, Each girl brought a piece of my purpose. Sometimes they'd ask, "Miss Max, how do you smile after all that?" And I'd answer, "Because I made it out. And now I get to help you make it out too." I wasn't just healing myself anymore. I was holding the door open for others, and guarding it so no one could drag them back inside. Years passed. I built a life brick by brick, heart by heart, girl by girl. I became a licensed counselor. I bought a small home of my own, nothing grand, but filled with warmth. I filled the walls with photos of the girls I'd helped, the mentors who helped me, and the one surviving picture of my mother. And in the middle of it all, my old notebook, kept safe in a glass case, pages yellowed, but never forgotten. One spring morning, I received a letter. It was from the state. Denise had died in prison. There was no emotion in my chest. No joy. No sorrow. Just silence. A chapter finally closed. I lit a candle, not for her, but for me. For the girl I used to be. For the child who cried into scarf threads in the cold. For the 8-year-old locked in the dark, who never stopped hoping that someone would see her. I walked out into my garden and watched the wind carry the smoke upward. I whispered, "I made it." And that's when it truly hit me. I had become everything she said I'd never be. Strong, kind, safe, free. Now, as a grandmother myself, I hold my grandbabies in my arms and whisper stories, not of chains but of courage. They know I have scars, though they don't know all the details yet. One day they will. Because silence is no longer my prison. It's my platform. And maybe someday one of those little ones will be standing in front of a room, telling their own story of legacy, not of pain passed down but of strength passed forward. I no longer live in fear. I live in truth. And every time I share it, another girl somewhere might hear the message I once needed so badly. You are not what was done to you. You are what you become after it. If you met me today, you'd see an old woman with soft hands and a quiet smile. You'd find me on my porch with a cup of tea, humming while birds chatter in the trees. You might see children running across my lawn, calling out "Grandma Max" as they fall into my arms. You'd hear laughter in my home, the smell of cookies in the oven, and the warmth of a place that feels safe. But what you wouldn't see, unless I told you, is the little girl who once cried in the dark, chained in a basement, convinced the world had forgotten her. That girl never disappeared. She lives inside me, not as a wound but as a flame, because she survived. And in doing so she made room for me, the woman, the grandmother, the guide, the protector of girls who once felt voiceless. People sometimes ask, "Why do you still tell your story?" And I always answer the same way. Because there's always another girl out there still locked in her own kind of basement. And she needs to know. She is not alone. She is not forgotten. And she can make it out. Just like I did. Her name was Margaret. And she was never meant to be broken. No matter how dark your past has been, it does not define the light you carry inside. You are not broken, you are rebuilt. Stronger, wiser, braver. You've come through storms others couldn't imagine, and you're still standing. Every scar on your heart is proof that pain didn't win. So keep going. Keep healing. Keep shining. You don't owe anyone silence. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. You matter. And remember, the little girl you once were? She's proud of the woman you've become. You are not what happened to you. You are what you rose from. You are living proof that the most beautiful stories are born from the deepest wounds. And baby, the world is better because you're still here. Before I leave the stage, make sure you subscribe to this Grandma Stories channel. And let me know where you're watching from the comments section. We are ready to give $50 giveaway for reaching 1,000 subscribers. Thank you.